And also, you can hear a bit of noise in my background. I'm doing this from my porch, so there's a bit of, it's very windy. That's why you can hear the chime going off all the time. So bear with me. I think Dinkley will take over very soon. So for those of you who have never joined our sessions, this is just to let you know that we do these sessions mostly every, now we've done it for almost every week in this month. But it's a session that allow us to build capacities in various areas around systems thinking and application and practice, and then to create a space for researchers, policymakers, advocates within various sectors to come and engage and also share their experiences on things that are working, things that are lacking, and also lessons that we can learn from each other. So that is the essence of this capacity building activity. My colleague, my name is Gina Teddy. I realize I've not introduced myself. Apologies for that. I'm sitting in Accra at the moment, and it's afternoon here. And I do this webinar together with my
Gina, you are muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
So I'm doing this session with my colleague Dinkley, who just said you are muted. Who is sitting, but Botswana should introduce herself. And then we also have other administrative colleagues who support us from Accra. We also have some other sub-regional colleagues who support from the sub-region, but mostly we are trying to get a community of practice that will be willing to engage and also share their experiences around health system. So that's what SysTaC does. And we hope to continue with these activities as we go along. So without wasting much time, I think most of us online today have joined most of our activities. Today, our topic is looking at embedded research and how that can be used to enhance practice or research activities, or even to be used for advocacy purposes. And most of you are doing research somehow, or maybe deliberately or non-deliberately. So some of you will be using routine data to enforce them. Others will just be doing it deliberately as part of their, their dissertations in their MPH programs and PhDs, or any other program whatsoever. So my colleague will now take over to talk to us about how to use embedded research, using it from the systems thinking perspective for purposes of your research, for purposes of practice even, and for purposes of improving what we are doing. So over to you, Dinkley. Your participants are waiting.
Great, thank you very much, Gina. And once more, good afternoon to all of you who have joined us this afternoon. As Gina has said, this is a series of webinars that we have been trying to organize and facilitate for ourselves here in the continent, with a view to really create a community of practice around the application of systems thinking, especially in health. But we also recognize that systems thinking is an approach to the way that we do things that can also be applied to many other different sectors or different fields. So as Gina has indicated this afternoon, what I would be sharing with you is a topic on embedded research. So I will try to focus on that. Please give me a moment. I am home, so I have other tenants that don't pay rent. They just do as they please. Just give me a second. Sorry about that. Sorry?
We can't see the video.
Oh, you can only hear the sound.
Yes, please.
I think you are still sharing your screen, the presentation. That is what is on the screen now.
Okay, okay. Let me share it from here. Is that okay now?
Yes, that's perfect.
Yes.
Yes.
In policy making, everything has to be done yesterday. Policymakers always need information contextualized. The turnaround time is fairly quick. We need to have capacity to be able to do this kind of rapid synthesis. So I think having more institutions doing rapid evidence synthesis would be very, very helpful.
We want to be able to pose important policy questions based on the best available evidence, other countries' experience, and to facilitate policy discussions and to come up with effective and efficient solutions.
Okay.
For low and middle income countries like Georgia, there is no enough resources to produce evidence that could inform their decisions.
When the disaster comes, the limited resources that the government has gets immediately overstretched. Especially human resources, they don't have enough time to follow the evidence or research it and thoroughly analyze. So any additional support that they could get is helpful.
Okay, just the last one.
It was very helpful to have this mechanism in place and to have easy and continuous access to this type of expertise and skills, because questions were a lot and we needed instant answers to those questions, and it was very important to make sure that these answers were evidence-based and well justified, because the responsibility for planning was really very high and very heavy.
Okay. So what did people hear? What stood out for you, or what key message are you hearing coming across from the various policymakers that you saw in all these videos? Anyone care to comment? Just your reflection on the three videos. Go ahead, Remy, please. You are muted in case you are speaking, Remy. Remy, we can't hear you. There is a bit of an echo coming from your end. Yeah, maybe you can just add your thoughts on the chat while you sort out maybe your audio. Still the same thing, Remy. Sorry, Remy, we are not able to hear you. I think there's a bit of a problem with your audio. Okay. So anybody else who wants to reflect on the three short videos? What message did you hear? Hello, are we there?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Go ahead, Wisdom. Is it?
It's
Oh,
being,
I think
Oh, Chizani. Go ahead, Doc.
yes. I think overall my take home message is the policy making is a fast process that needs to be done as soon as possible. And when you are making policies, ensure that it is evidence-based, draw from experiences of other countries, and contextualize to your own local setting. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that submission, Dr. Mbenge. Policy making is a rapid process. People always need answers, and they desire that these policies that they even make must be evidence-based. Anybody else with a reflection, and then we move on?
hello.
Yes, go ahead, Wisdom.
Yes. So also, I think we use past experience in policy making, and we focus on best practices, as was said earlier on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So quite a lot of things that they brought up. So for me, it was a number of things. The first one was policymakers or even practitioners or implementers, they always have questions, and they desire that, you know, somebody could support them in seeking, you know, evidenced, informed answers to the questions that they have. But also, even as we recognize that these answers that they seek for really need to be quick, evidence needs to be synthesized in the most effective and timely manner. So that is why they have a desire to always have access to experts that are able to synthesize, you know, available information. One of the commentators indicated that, you know, reports are always available within, for instance, the ministries of health. But what we struggle with is that the current human resource that we have doesn't always have the time to follow the evidence. They don't always have the time to synthesize this evidence and be able to apply it in decision making. But also the other key one, resources, not only just for research, but also resources to be able to take time and really look at what is available in terms of informing policy. So this is the space that we need to recognize when we are conducting research, that we are doing many of our research efforts in a space or within a context of policymakers, implementers, and practitioners that have questions, and questions that really speaks to what they do on a day-to-day basis, real world problems that they are seeking to address. And this is perhaps where this whole aspect or the notion of embedded research comes from. So what is embedded approach to research? Obviously, because it's a very general term that has also been practiced and applied in various fields, we may not necessarily have a single definition to it, but perhaps we can understand it from the term itself, even from the dictionary, to understand it as, you know, describing how something is placed within something else. So the issue of position, the issue of where do you stand in relation to something that we could perhaps use as a reference point. So in HPSR, for instance, the focus, as we understand, is always on the researcher and the various actors of the health system. Even as we recognize that even when you are wearing that hat of a researcher at any given point in time, you are acting in some way within the health system. So as an actor in the health system, as a researcher, when you want to embed your research enterprise, it requires that you negotiate and conduct research from within the system as opposed to on the system. And you do this with the intention that the research that you are conducting will lead to positive change or positive adoption within the health system. I mean, I could ask that even across the room this afternoon. Raise your hand if you have ever engaged in research and your intention or your justification for conducting that research was never for that research to inform policy. Many of us, perhaps, that are in academia, when we look at the submission of our students' research proposals, or even many of us that are researchers in various fields, the number one thing that we always say justifies the conduct of our research is that we believe it will inform policy. We often argue that the findings from this study can be used to improve programs. The findings from the study can be used to inform policy. So that is the intent that we always have. And so the key question then becomes, why is it that many research that a lot of us that are here this afternoon seem to only end in our library archives, for instance, if you are in academia, or they only seem to end in various journals that you might publish with? What might be the problem, and how might we encourage a situation where there is a bit of an uptake? So again, as I was saying, we may not have a single definition to this, but we can recognize that when we look at the place of a researcher to the various actors within the sector where you are doing your research and how you relate with them within your research enterprise or endeavor, that creates some sort of an embeddedness. So the thing that you begin to see with regards to embedded research, or an approach that you take towards conducting your research, is you establish mutual relationships with your host or with the participants or context in which you are carrying out your research. And in this instance, we are particularly interested with the health system. So how can you locate yourself in your research enterprise with regards to your position to the health system? And you want to do this because, given the justification that we just spoke about, you want to ensure that you bridge that gap between academia and the academic knowledge that you might produce, but also ensuring that it eventually leads to something that can be taken up. It enables networks and critical approaches to developing systems, policies, and practice that, really draw from the evidence that your research is able to produce. So what becomes quite fundamental in embedded research approach is really the location of the researcher, where in embedded research as an approach or as a practice in the field, the researcher is now located within the space where they are conducting research, within the space where traditionally it may be occupied by professionals, and so you are able to come into as a partner because of the research endeavor that you are undertaking, to be able to observe or to learn with them and eventually be able to share the knowledge that can be generated from your enterprise and be able to influence policy or to influence practices within that context. So maybe let me pause here and ask this question, even as we want to emphasize that embedded research is not a research method, but rather an approach or a strategy that we utilize even when we are conducting research. But I want to believe that some of you that are here, especially those of you from the social science, even as we talk about embedded research in terms of the position that you want to take in conducting research with regards to your setting or with regards to your participants, is one that mirrors, some level of partnership. You are engaging with them to be able to learn with and from them about that which you are conducting or the phenomena that you might be exploring. So I'm wondering, those of you who are from the social science field, if this perhaps invokes some thoughts in terms of which other research methods sort of resonate with embedded research. Does any come to your mind when we talk about the engagement of the researcher with their participants or their location in terms of the study setting? Anybody? Go ahead, Anika. Oh,
Is it okay?
Remy, I think your audio is a bit of a problem. We are not able to hear from you at all. There is a bit of an echo. Sorry, Remy. Sorry, Remy, we are not able to hear you. Okay. Anika, sorry, go ahead, please.
Okay, I am thinking of action research.
Yeah, action research. And what about action research that, you know, makes you think it's very close to embedded research? What are some of the key features in action research? If you are able to speak to it, yeah.
I think the involvement of the participant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in each area of the implementation, planning, and etc.
Absolutely. So involving the participants across the research enterprise, from planning to execution and even learning in that regard, right? So some of the examples that we might have include ethnography or participatory action research, as our colleague has indicated, embedded mixed methods that perhaps some of us are quite familiar with. So again, what you begin to see, like Anika was saying, is the meaningful partnership that you begin to form to ensure that there is learning that is deliberate and that goes across those that are within the system or that are experiencing the phenomena that you are understudying, while also you might be coming in as a research expert in that particular field. And so we could almost begin to appreciate what this might immediately translate into. So why does embedding research in our settings, why does forming partnerships with our, participants, as in perhaps policymakers or implementers, why does it matter? What benefit does it accord us as researchers in this instance? Let me pause here just so that I'm not the only one speaking, and ask any volunteer to just read out for us the slide that appears up there. Anybody who wishes to read through? Or should I assign? Could I perhaps trouble you, Clement? Is that okay? Can you read for us the points on the slide? Clement? Avoka. Remy, if you are trying again, I think we have a problem with the audio. So please, I see a hand is up. Gina, I'm not able to see whose hand. Oh, okay, it's Remy. Sorry, Remy, I think there is a bit of a problem with your audio.
It's Sarah.
Oh, sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Okay, why does it matter? Greater access to the subject of inquiry, the system or organization. research, evidence uptake, translation and use. Knowledge production and use is shaped by people. Greater chance of identifying substantively relevant problems and questions. Greater chance to observe the routine functioning of the system. Less likelihood of being blocked by gatekeepers within the system. Access to tacit knowledge within the system. Opportunity to engage with difficult findings in safe spaces. Better position to make changes in the system. So these are why system, these are the whys.
Yeah. Why embedded research?
Embedded
methods.
research is important, yes. Or we should embark on the embedded research.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sarah. And so let me ask, especially some of you who have conducted research from sort of outside the health system. Let's say you are from an academic institution. When you look at some of the points that are submitted here, what has been your experiences? Is there any that has that you might have experienced that was a bit of a challenge, that required you to either draw on your networks to be able to continue with your research endeavor, or that really required you to have one way or another of working with systems gatekeepers? What has been people's experiences? Anybody who can speak from their experience from an academic standpoint, perhaps, if we have any who can speak from that end. I'm going to pick on a few names because I know some people that are here. I think if there's still, Dr. Oliver, are you still with us? Dr. Mwemba. Are you able to share with us what could perhaps have been some of your experiences coming in to do research on an organization that you are not part of, but seeking to do research with or on them? Dr. Oliver, are you there? Okay, maybe he's not there. Okay, so I have no choice but to pick on some of Dr. Mbenge. Let's see, she's still there. Naka, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay,
I'm still here. I think when I was doing my master's dissertation, I had to seek for permission from a private institution, and unfortunately, because of the bottlenecks, I wasn't granted permission. So, when you're not part of the organization, that are some of the stumbling blocks you may encounter.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you very much, Ngaka, for that submission. So these are some of the hurdles that we are perhaps able to overcome when we do embedded research, when we engross ourselves and become part of the organization or the system that we are doing research with. One of the most important things, I think, for me, even when we were listening to the few clips that we looked at earlier, is the fact that policymakers and implementers, they always have research questions, or questions that really they need rigorous information that is synthesized, that is credible, that they can rely on to make certain decisions. And so when they become our partners in conducting research, we are sure of certain things. First of all, we are sure of the fact that they will open up avenues and allow us to access data that is needed. They will also ensure that they provide us with other contextual issues that we may not necessarily be aware of, even when we are conducting our research. But the most important aspect also being that they can give us questions that really matter, real world problems or questions that really seek to answer, tangible issues and challenges within the health system, and therefore allowing that our research enterprise can really contribute significantly to the strengthening of the health system that I believe we all seek to do. Because of time, I'm not going to dwell much on this slide, but what this slide is really just trying to demonstrate to you is that many of us that are attending this afternoon, we have had multiple hats that we put on when it comes to the research enterprise. Some of you have been students, Dr. Mbenge, who was speaking to us this afternoon, has been an employee of the Ministry of Health, but she's also a student, at the University of Botswana, and so conducting research within this health system where she's on one point she's a practitioner, on the other point she's a student, but at the other end also she is now working as a researcher. So at any given point in time, as many researchers, we wear different hats in relation to the health system. And in wearing these hats, we have the opportunity to find or seek ways in which we can embed our research enterprise. Remember the idea being you as a researcher recognizing your position with the object of study that you might be looking at in that particular point in time. So many of you have engaged with researchers as program coordinators. Some of you have engaged with policymakers as donor agencies because they are funding some of the work that you are doing or some of the work that your ministry is interested in, and so you wear that particular hat. So these are the different positions in which any one of us at any point we find ourselves in. And we need to be able to recognize how we can allow that position to embed itself within the organization or within the health system where we want to conduct or carry our research. So simply really saying to us, recognize the hat that you are wearing at any given point in time so that you are able to forge meaningful relationships and partnerships that can support the conduct of your research where you might be working at. So having understood that embedded research is really an approach to conducting research where as a researcher you become part of the system or part of the organization and form partnerships with them. What might be some of the key ways to recognize when you are taking this approach to research? The first one, as we have been saying, is your position, the positionality of the researcher to the object of study. So you might come in as an insider researcher wearing multiple hats. So I just gave an example of Dr. Mbenge, who at one point she is a Ministry of Health employee, but at some other point she is a student as well, and then coming in as a researcher in that regard. Or you could be a staff member who is then appointed in a research study that is ongoing. I'm sure many of us are familiar with these different studies, especially during the era of HIV and AIDS. There has been all these various research partnerships that have been formed with our ministries of health. And we know that we have had people, who were in the system who also became part of those research partnerships and so on. The other characteristics that is important for us to recognize about embedded research is that it is an approach to research that requires high levels of continuous negotiation. And this may involve a situation where you sit together with your research partners or your research team. And in this instance, we are talking about policymakers, we are talking about practitioners, we are talking about people that are working in the system that would not necessarily always identify themselves as researchers. So proper identification of research partners is very important. What does each one of them bring to the team, and why do they matter to be part of the team? So that is very important to really look into. Be able to sit together as a team and therefore agree on the purpose and the objective of the research. Again, as you can see, this can be highly contested. You might be funded by, a donor agency. They are interested in certain answers, whereas your partners at the Ministry of Health, they are interested in other answers as well. So there is that give and take that needs to happen. How do we come up with research questions? The framing of those research questions is something that, again, we continuously have to negotiate it. So the research enterprise in this regard becomes an iterative process of really negotiating across the multiple partners or actors that might be engaged. So I'll not necessarily go through each one of them. Hopefully they are quite self-explanatory. But even as we look at each one of them, hopefully you are able to tease out or to see what challenges embedded research might pose to the research enterprise, and we will talk about that towards the end. The other characteristics that can help you recognize or help you to really be deliberate about embedding your research enterprise is embracing context and appreciating that the health system is a complex adaptive system. So recognizing that actors will keep changing. I'm pretty sure many of you have had an experience where you visit one office at the Ministry of Health, you meet a policymaker there, you talk to them about a research idea, they really like the idea, they talk about why it will be important for that unit, and then you come 2 months later, you find that that particular individual that you spoke to is no longer there, and so you have to start again. So it's very important to recognize that and anticipate that even when you take this approach to how you are going to conduct your research. Another emphasis or another characteristic that you need to recognize is with regards to building and maintaining trust, which can only come about when the team members or partners in the research endeavor are effective, they communicate very well with one another, and there is accountability. A situation where policymakers are able to hold academics accountable and vice versa with regards to the research enterprise. But also, especially from the academic standpoint, moving beyond this, instance where we only make appearances with practitioners and policymakers when we simply want an endorsement from them or a letter of support. I mean, I'm sure many of you have had experiences with instances where a lot of donors that we apply to for grants, they always say, you must have a letter of support from the Ministry of Health representative or from an NGO that you seek to partner with. And so you realize that the only time that you are really engaging with these people is when you need this letter of support, but they were never part and parcel of, deciding on the research question, deciding on the research objectives. And so embedded research is where you really move away from that. It's no longer just about getting the letter of support, but sitting together with, interested parties or people that are affected by the research enterprise to be able to construct the research with them, really show that meaningful partnership and collaboration that you are seeking to create with them. But of course, as you can see, there are challenges, and these challenges may be those that we are familiar with. Some of you that, again, may be familiar with ethnography or action research. There might be a lot of challenges. Some of them could include, again, the interest of the policymakers in terms of what they believe the research should be doing or what they believe the research should be saying. So that can cause kind of a friction in terms of maintaining the scientific rigor, if you like, of the research enterprise. Because as much as they are partners with you in the research enterprise, you also still want to be able to maintain the scientific independence in the way that you are going to conduct research, while at the same time, you want to respond to their information needs. The other challenge, and this might be more familiar to those of you who oftentimes conduct evaluation research or program evaluation, and recognize how when you are an insider and you are evaluating yourself, there is often the likelihood that you might be biased, or you might only be interested in reporting that which is positive about what you are doing, as opposed to also speaking to the negative aspect of it. So embedded research does pose these challenges that we must be aware of and come up with ways of how do we address them to still ensure that the results that we yield from this type of research is credible, is trustworthy, and can, adequately inform research in the most appropriate manner. Let me pause here, and I don't know, Gina, if there are any questions or comments in the chat. I'm just about to finish.
No, there isn't any at the moment.
Okay, so I would just love to pause here maybe and hear from one or two people from across the room in terms of having conducted research within the health system and working with various policymakers or program implementers. What has been some of your experiences, whether challenges or what you seem to feel worked very well for you? And in this instance, I'm really interested in people that have done research that, was really in partnership with policymakers or program implementers, if there is any who could speak to that at all. Is there anyone with that experience? Yes, please go ahead. I'm not able to see his hand. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Okay, yeah, so sorry, I was in a position where I couldn't speak earlier. Yeah, so maybe I can just share broadly. We have had, like, for example, quite a lot of research collaborations that actually we work with the Ministry of Health, for example. Some of them are externally funded, and we actually sometimes in the initial phases, we are responding as academic institutions to grant calls, where, for example, NIH has some broad themes where they want research to be done on. So in most cases, you actually realize, because sometimes they are quite sector specific, in this particular case, Ministry of Health, you actually realize you can't just do it alone, and also NIH would require letters and all that, and sometimes actually you need data, and you actually realize also whatever you're doing is actually useful. Like, for example, right now we are doing one study where we are actually trying to task shift some NCDs kind of like functions to the community. So this is a case of where we have like patients with comorbidities, which are basically NCDs in nature, and the current protocol in most cases at ART clinics mostly actually will actually really focus more on HIV, and for NCD management they would refer to a doctor, which actually in most cases in rural areas there are no doctors. So what has been happening is we have quite a lot of HIV patients who are managed very well on HIV side, but not managed well on NCD. So what we actually proposed in this particular kind of research is to try to make art center art centers as one-stop center where they can actually manage both NCDs as well as HIV. But basically what that means is it requires shifting some of the functions that were actually in the confines of the doctors to the nurses as well as to the community. And so there's been negotiations like which one of these. So we couldn't do that kind of research without actually engaging the ministry, because their protocol and their guidelines are actually based on the traditional way. So but actually when we raised this, they were like, actually this is something we have been wondering and we have interest to actually see how this works. So even as we have been doing the research, they have already started shifting and more like integrating the two services, but also very, very much interested in the outcome of the research. So these are kind of, but as you would see, they require a lot of negotiation, require a lot of give and take, and in most cases they have other sub questions they want answered to see, for example, how they are doing on certain specific aspects that may relate, for example, to let's say commodities on NCDs. How are we doing on commodities on HIV? What capacity do we have and all that? So they actually eventually embed a few other questions that actually you never anticipated in the beginning, but actually in the process, you find, I think there's some kind of win-win situation. But also, I think the theoretical issues that sometimes we tend to push for from the academic point of view, actually when we try to take a critical lens on the functions of how the ministry works, you find they get some kind of compromised, and they, in most cases, in such cases, you actually cannot subject the Ministry of Health systems and evaluate them from a critical angle, because you sort of like embed within them and more like work to improve the system.
Great. Hello? Did I lose you, or we just lost Dr.? Oh, okay.
No, we can hear you.
Okay, maybe it was just. Okay, so thank you very much, Oliver. Yeah, very great submission and a very good example in terms of what really happens when research is embedded within the system. So the thing that you might want to already begin to think about is, what was the role of the different policymakers or even the practitioners? So you are able to see this constant negotiation that goes on in terms of what is allowable, what may not be allowable, what other questions, additional questions can we answer with this research enterprise. So again, in the interest of time, I will not necessarily go through each one of these. I think people can already begin to see what some of the challenges embedded research might pose to the research enterprise. But the important thing becomes, being deliberate about how we address these challenges to still ensure that at the end of the day, we have evidence that is credible and evidence that can really inform the work that we do in the most appropriate way. I just want to end this, and this is where I will also draw Gina in so that we share a bit of an experience of what we did in South Africa. We will not dwell much on it because, again, it's quite similar in some way to what Dr. Mwemba has just shared with us. So this is a research project, but also an implementation type of project that was conducted in South Africa a couple of years ago. There was quite a lot of interesting thing about this specific project, in that it really involved, first of all, 3 institutions of higher learning in Cape Town, where you might often think that these institutions will be at competition with one another, but we are seeing here, 3 institutions coming together to implement a project that could benefit the department in terms of how they were developing leadership. So this project in particular came about by way of the ministry itself, the Department of Western Cape, recognizing or desiring to improve leadership and management as a way of strengthening the health system, and therefore calling on experts from the University of Cape Town and the University of Western Cape to try and work with them. Kindly mute your mic. Gina, are you able to mute them? Yeah. So you already begin to see, some of the key issues from the DAS project was that there was a deliberate establishment of partnership across the different actors, both from the academic standpoint of view, the Ministry of Health, and the different levels of managing across the system. And also the appreciation that this partnership should not only be there because of the project, but should be a continuous network of engaging and working together. If at all we recognize that we are all actors in the system, and our goal is really to try and strengthen the health system. So, there was time that was dedicated to building this partnership, the negotiations that constantly went on. And that even when the project was conceived, the research institutions made a deliberate effort of asking the ministry itself, what are the key questions, what matters, what has been the challenges, what is it that you want to see, what sort of activities will matter for you the most. And so quite a lot of the things that came out of this project were also a response to that which has been verbalized by the participants, if you may, or the policymakers, because it was also aligning with the direction in which they wanted to take the system towards. So I think what I just wanted to share with the DAS project was that academic researchers need to be deliberate about the position that they give policymakers or practitioners in the research enterprise. That beyond including them as participants, we want to include them as partners. Partners are such that they can contribute towards developing the concept of the research. They become partners if they are able to decide or input in terms of what the research objectives should be, what the research questions should be, what the type of research methods that we are going to employ. When they become partners in deciding the research sites where we are going to carry out our study. But also when we allow them to raise their own needs, information needs, when it comes to what they do on a day-to-day basis, or where they really want to be able to take the health system. And so we recognize this concept of, allowing them to become co-researchers and co-creators of knowledge in the health system where they are working, because we want to try and help them to develop what we want, what we refer to as learning systems. Because one of the things that you really begin to see with an embedded approach to research is that organizations begin to really grow and develop into these learning organizations. They're always interested in new information and learning how they can really improve in that way. Gina, I don't know if you want to add anything before I conclude.
Yeah, and just to mention that within this project particularly, what was nice is to see how practitioners began to take ownership of the project. So you could see that immediate feedback, people could see the results of the effort that they were putting in with regards to the issues that were being addressed in the research, and how these leaders or managers within the districts were picking up on the feedback that they were receiving and implementing them and seeing the results. And for that matter, by the time we got to the assessment of the project, we could see that they were actually showing ownership. And what we were providing was basically the guidelines and also creating the environment within which people felt safe to engage. There was a lot of unintended but positive effects that we benefited from later on for other projects, which was because we created a long-term relationship with these implementers across districts, even all the way to the provincial departments of health, highest level. And then also there was a learning environment that was created in each of these districts. So they were always, they actually realized how important it is for leadership to create mentorship, coaching processes for them to be open about discussing about the problems of their facilities and also within the districts, and then also to engage in an academic, very systematic, high-level engagement about the issues affecting their district and within the health system broadly, and how that relates to other districts or provinces, and how well they are doing with regards to implementation of their own projects. So that is very beautiful to see, which is something that in most of our parts of where I sit in West Africa, most of the time institutions see themselves as in competition with each other because of funding. So funding becomes the source where everybody wants to protect rather than harnessing the strengths across the various institutions to come together. And I think that's one thing that even funders are trying to limit the silo, the research function in silos, or just doing research for the sake of publication, but rather research that will have an impact. So I'm not taking over gameplay. Over to you.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Gina. So I just want to end by saying this. Many of us that are here perhaps are researchers, but maybe also there are some of you who are sitting within the Ministry of Health offices or within facilities. So research is an enterprise, and you might be familiar with a lot of your friends, colleagues that sometimes come to you and say, there is a grant proposal that I want to respond to. Can you give me a support letter, or can you work with me? Embedded research suggests that when you approach people to be part of your research team, you must be clear in terms of what it is that they are bringing to the team. What we have begun to see most recently is that, organizations such as, Alliance at the WHO or NHS, like Dr. Oliver was giving us an example, is when you respond to some of their grant calls, there is a section where they will ask for the team, for the research team, to demonstrate how the evidence from the project, from their research project, is likely to be taken up by policymakers. So when you have embedded your research, when you have taken an embedded approach to doing your research, it becomes very easy to meet that requirement, because you can demonstrate that, our core principal investigator is the director of public health for the Ministry of Health, or our core investigators are DHMT coordinators if your system is organized in that way. So immediately that shows the reviewers of that grant call that there is very good likelihood of ownership of the research findings once you are done, because you have been able to embed them as part of your research team. But also, if maybe you are not able to pronounce their specific position in the research team, you can speak to this by way of saying, when we developed this concept, we engaged in a workshop with the Ministry of Health, and these are some of the questions that they were coming up with. So it allows you, when you demonstrate that you are taking an embedded approach to your research, there are certain things that you need to be deliberate about. How do you come up with your questions? At what point did you engage the policymakers in planning your research study, and so on? And so these things are coming. We all have to demonstrate them, especially when we are seeking funding. because like I was saying at the beginning, all of us, when we conduct research, we always say, my study will contribute to policy making. My study will contribute to strengthening practice and program planning. But is that always the case? How do we ensure that that eventually happens? And so for some of you that might be students and are interested in knowing more and more about embedded research, there are certain key terms that you can use to still be able to learn around that particular concept. Again, because they speak to really how you approach the research enterprise. So I just put those there for you to use even as you search. Because when you say embedded research, yes, Google, for instance, will give you back quite a lot of things, but there are still other ways that you can still know and get useful resources about really doing embedded research. And I want to leave you with, these are some of the other very useful resources, both for some of you that are interested in knowing more about HPSR and how to do research within this field, but also trying to also grow maybe your knowledge in embedded research. Happy to share this with you as well, those of you who have joined the hub and joined, the Hive, and as well as SysTech Africa. Gina, this is where I end, and over to you. Thank you very much.
All right, Dinte, thank you for the presentation. I was trying to share the results of the poll we just had. Let me see if I can share it. Oh, can you see the poll?
Yes, we can see it already, Gina.
Okay, I can see it.
Oh, sorry.
All right, anyways. So I guess a lot of people have really taken on board what they've heard this afternoon by saying that they will be happy to use embedded research going forward. The only thing I could add here is that embedded research has become the main mode by which most funders are actually putting in their funding. So you have a lot of donors now using various terms such as implementation research, action research, participatory action research, and a whole term to explain embedded research. And also to try and promote multidisciplinarity, which is where they make sure that different people sitting at different positions and in different areas join one research to ensure that there is more impact, and then there is the possibility of actually putting these research findings or outcomes into practice. So you see that now most donor or grant calls are asking you to have somebody from the ministry or the institution that is actually leading this research. And there has been benefit to it, because if you are successful with such grants, what it means is that you tend to have long-term allies and long-term relationship with the people that you are engaging with regards to the research. But that involves a lot of management, because remember, for most implementers or policymakers, they want instant results, unlike researchers who want to understand the research processes. So by doing embedded research, you really need to have an open mind and be flexible. Because without that, it becomes difficult, because you cannot stick to what you want, as most people might want something else, particularly the practitioners. And that is why the renegotiation, and constant negotiations come in, as Dinkley and one other participant had pointed out. And also making sense of the process together is one of the fundamental things you should be willing to engage with. And also to know that this is actually very easy to do, so far as you are open-minded, and then also so far as you can lead the process and create. It's not about ownership, it's about mutual benefits. So the dynamics need to change, and the mindset around embedded research also need to change. You know, normally we do research to have ownership, but this is not the point. And then also to, without necessarily attacking our practitioner colleagues, but also appreciate the fact that practitioners actually tend to do the work on the ground and talk in the process. So sometimes getting them to commit and getting them to actually sit down and do the writing when it comes to research activities is difficult. So you also need to be clear in your mind who is doing what and what their competencies are. Sometimes they wouldn't tell you they do not have the competence or they don't feel confident in doing what you're asking them to do. And you have those who are really research focused and will want to really fully hands-on engage in the research process, the writing and what have you. But when you work with practitioners, you also have to be willing to know that this is what they can provide you, mostly whatever materials you need, the talking, the validation and what have you. But when it comes to the writing of these things to reflect what you have found, it can be also something that you need to remain open-minded about. So these are issues that I want you to reflect on, but basically each research project is different and you have to learn on the job, but the best way or approach to this is to be open-minded. I guess it's time for us to open the floor for any comments or sharing of experiences so that we can learn from each other. Is there anyone who wants to share their experience? Just unmute yourself and go ahead to speak. And if you are having challenges, please type it in the chat box and we'll read it out.
Hello, this is Emmanuel.
Yes, Emmanuel, go ahead.
Yes, I'm trying to encourage them to fill in their names. I think I've gotten just a few of them.
All right, so please, Emmanuel is saying put your names and email addresses so that they can capture you for your certification purposes. All right, anybody wants to share their experience with using embedded research in one way or the other? We can have 2 experiences before we end the session.
If we still have time, Gina,
we have about 5 more minutes.
Okay, so maybe just pose a question a bit differently to colleagues that are attending with us this afternoon. Many of you are familiar with research one way or the other, whether you are familiar with research because people have come to your organization to ask that they conduct research in your organization, or they have asked you to partner with them. And so there are some organizations that actually feel a little bit overwhelmed, or they are tired with researchers often coming to their organization and then going once the research enterprise is gone. So I just want to hear from across the room. When we are talking about conducting research, what comes to people's mind? How do you feel about the research enterprise? I think we can all appreciate that research is good and it is necessary. But what is it about research that perhaps some of us have come to view as, rather tiring or rather not a very nice thing to do? I'm actually really trying to look at especially policymakers. And with all humility, Dr. Masukwana, I don't know if you are able to speak.
Thank you for putting me on the spotlight.
Sorry.
I work in the Ministry of Health, and I also chair and the National Institutional Review Board. And I think what you mentioned in your presentation is very interesting, because more often than not, we may assess applications and we find that the researcher is not a at concordance with the information on the ground, because you find they're asking research question and it shows clearly that there has not been dialogue with the Ministry of Health. And so I think that often poses a challenge. And I think I came a bit late to the presentation, and that I picked it up where you mentioned that there is a need for a partnership, not just somebody being the provider of information or data, that we often also, as policymakers, are reluctant to provide. But one other thing is that there are so many things we want answered as policymakers. And if researchers can come to the table, more often than not, we are willing to actually come in and assist as necessary. That's my contribution, having listened to the presentation this afternoon. I came a bit late. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Masukwane, and my sincere apology for putting you on the spot, even as my senior. But I knew you would be able to reflect on these things because, you know, you deal with them even from that national level. So I think for me, really, as researchers, and especially for those of you who do research that is really aimed at, you know, real issues that you also are familiar with, both as a practitioner, but perhaps even as an academic who is very close to what your ministries of health are doing or any other project that you might be supporting. Embedded research is very important, but embedded research says form partnerships and let these partnerships be meaningful. Let it not be just about endorsements, but recognize that, you know, people that are program implementers or policymakers, they have a key stake to play in the research process itself. So don't only go to them when you want support or when you want a letter, but engage them, like Dr. Masukwane was saying, so that we end up asking questions that are relevant. We end up asking questions that provides value to the implementers and the policymakers. And I would really want to emphasize this to some of you that might be here who are master's students, to say, you know, many different ministries often have a research strategy for their ministries. So, you know, consider this and you know, take time to be able to conduct research that seeks to answer questions that are meaningful. Back to you. I see there is a hand up. Evans, go ahead, and then Gina, I hand totally back to you now to close the session.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is just a quick one. Also to contribute that one other way that the ministry, I'm with the Mental Health Authority. One other way also to contribute is for the organization to have research areas that they would be interested in to also share with researchers. In that, the Mental Health Authority has developed a research agenda where they pull together various actors and stakeholders that would be influential and then also contribute in a way to conducting and then also finding out the questions that are available to improve mental health and then also to implement mental health programs. So this has been compiled together in a form of a booklet or a book which any researcher that wants to or is interested in looking at the researching into the mental health space can partner. So already the Mental Health Authority is open now to partner with people who want to enter into the mental health research space. So that's also one other way of also just looking at it.
Great, thank you very much, Clement. Yeah, I mean, it's again, similar issues to what also Dr. Masukwane was speaking to, and also earlier on to say that we need to recognize that questions are there, policymakers are seeking answers, and so let us be deliberate about, you know, conducting research that matters. Gina, are you there?
Yes, I am here. everyone for your contribution. And thank you so much for your time. And thank you, Dintley, for this wonderful session. I think it's been interesting, it's been engaging, and most importantly, it has been a learning process for all of us. So thank you for everyone who's online. We hope to see you next week. We have to confirm next week because the facilitator, next week we are looking at how to write a case study. Those of us who teach, we use these case studies to teach. So those of you who have joined this community of practice for systems thinking, we want to actually have a training in how to write a case study so that you can put your experiences on paper and then we can use them as very valid ways of learning through experience sharing. But we need the confirmation. We haven't had the confirmation yet. And if it happens that we have to postpone that, we'll let you know. But we are keeping our fingers crossed that we'll be able to hold that meeting next week. On that note, we have exhausted our time and we are almost taking yours. So Adeniyi, you have your hand up. Do you want to?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I'm really very sorry. I missed the last two sessions, and even this one, I wasn't able to flow because I was having disjointed connections with my internet access. So I would really be very glad if I can have the materials so that the materials for the last two sessions, so that I can go through and then do some learning myself. I'll be very much interested in the next, session, which is talking also on how to write a case study. We are going through a new initiative in Nigeria, social health insurance at the subnational level. So there are lots of things that are coming as innovations that have been taken, and they need to be documented for, experience sharing.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that. Please, we want to encourage you when we make a call, most of you don't respond to us, especially for policy briefs or blogs or cases. So please, as we are mutually learning, let's try and put that into practice so that there will be mutual engagement and those who are not here will be able to learn. With regards to the videos, most of them have been uploaded. Emmanuel, who is online, Emmanuel, the one with the, what do you call it?
Was an email that said
with the email, he'll be sending the link so that you'll be able to access them on YouTube. So they'll be uploaded.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And then you can be able to share it with your colleagues who may be interested as well.
Okay,
all right,
then.
I'm wondering if someone will be able to take a picture.
Materials.
Yes. If you
the
have
other
any
materials,
other material, you can let us know.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, I think we've come to the end of this session. Dintley, do you want to take a picture of us? I have uploaded something, but I still can't take a picture. So we have to do it manually. If you can put your videos on, we'll just take a picture. Today I've enjoyed the session a lot. We can take a picture to have a memory of it. Dintley, do you have a good phone to take a picture of us? Anybody at all can take a picture?
Mine is on, but I can't see myself. I'm wondering.
Sorry, we can't help you. All right. Quite a number have put their videos on. Please keep them coming.
My video is on, but I'm not there. I don't know if it has to do with my system.
Okay, so who is this talking?
This is Sarah.
Okay. I can't even see you.
I'm here
so
now.
Let's see. Okay, you are there. All right,
okay,
Sarah, can
so
you
you
take a
want to
picture
start?
for us? I don't know who is taking a picture now. Why am I not even there? Okay, I'm here.
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay. Sarah, can you take a picture for us?
Okay.
Let us know when you are done, please.
Picture taken.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll share it next time, okay?
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Have a nice weekend, everybody.
And thanks for the good work, sister.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Gina, do you want to stay a few minutes with Emmanuel?
Sure.
Yeah.